All right. The topic of the presentation is OpenID Connect for credential issuance, and OpenID Connect for credential issuance is part of a larger initiative that is being conducted in a liaison between the Decentralized Identity Foundation and the OpenID Foundation to build a set of OpenID Connect extensions to support SSI applications. Now, the question might be, why do we work on using OpenID Connect for SSI? Well, basically, there is a misconception of OpenID Connect, even in our community, that the OpenID Connect was being architected for, the federated trust model only. And if you take a look onto the OpenID Connect specification that was published a couple of years back, there's already, for example, one element there that is called self-issued OP. So from the beginning, OpenID Connect was designed and architected to support a wide range of different architectures, from really big, huge centralized IDPs to large-scale federations with thousands of IDPs, up to the OP or the IDP running on the user's device. And we built on top of that work and use the existing Rails to support SSI applications. We want to leverage the simplicity and the security of OpenID Connect to the SSI community. And if you do not know about the security of OpenID Connect has been tested and formally analyzed, and some of the guys that did this incredible work are also in this session. So thanks for your work. And what we also would like to do is to allow existing OpenID Connect RPs, and we should have extended that also to IDPs to either issue or access SSI credentials. So it's built for a new application, but it's also built as a bridge for existing applications that want to reach out to SSI type of applications. In the standard model for self-sovereign identity, what basically happens is that the IDP that we know from the federated world is split into two components. So on the right-hand side, or on the left-hand side, you see those components. You've got the credential issuer, which issues some kind of credential, for example, asserting some identity data. And you've got the wallet that, on behalf of the holder, manages one or more credentials. And if a recipient of data or interested party wants to access these credentials, the holder produces a so-called verifiable presentation that is then provided to the verifier. And the key element here is that the holder of the credential needs to demonstrate that it is in possession of the cryptographic material that is used to bind that credential to the holder. And what we do in OpenID Connect for SSI, as I said, we developed a set of specifications that can be used for the different interfaces and different use cases. So if we start on the holder to verifier side, the basic layer is provided by SIOP v2, which is the next evolution, the next generation of self-issued OP, as it was defined in the OpenID Connect core spec. It's used for key exchange and authentication. So you might see that as an alternative to DID authentication, for example. And we've got, on top of that, OpenID Connect for verifier presentations, which extends OpenID Connect with mechanisms to request and provide verifier presentations. And I should also note that you can combine OpenID Connect for verifier presentations not only with SIOP v2, you can also use that with standard, traditional, ordinary OpenID Connect core. That's why we split that in two different specifications. The focus of today will be the issuance part. And the issuance part also is based on OpenID Connect core as the underlying protocol. And what we have started to work on is a draft that's called OpenID Connect for credential issuance. And we recently finalized, I think the second revision. I think we today finalized the second revision of the draft. And we are really excited to present the results of our work of the last month or so to you in this session today. So let's dig into OpenID Connect for credential issuance. So the work is based on pre-existing implementation experience, namely at Matter and Conversions Tech, but was also influenced by feedback that we collected in a couple of sessions. We started to gather requirements from the community at the Internet Identity Workshop, where we hosted 2 sessions and talked about some design principles, some ideas, and appreciate the feedback and the advice that we gathered from the community. And based on all those feedback and also ongoing conversation with different projects and organizations and companies that are already actively working on the implementation of the protocol, we have evolved the draft to the state that we are presenting today. Since it is still an individual draft, it can be found on my GitHub installation repository. We're planning to propose this draft to the Connect working group of the OpenID Foundation very soon. All right, what's the benefit of using OpenID Connect as the underlying rails for actually issuing verifiable credentials? First of all, the obvious advantage is that any OpenID Connect OP that already exists can, using this extension, also become a credential provider. And this is very important for existing federations that are out there in the space. And it's also important for the SSI principle, since without credential providers, especially with credential providers that are able to provide assured identities, asserting assured identities, it's really difficult to get adoption for the SSI principle on a broader basis. So with our work, we try to build the basis and the foundation for adoption by providing reach towards existing OPs. The second aspect that is not as obvious, but is interesting, it is to note that OpenID Connect, by the nature of the protocol, assumes that the OP, the issuer, takes over screen control, at least in the case of the authorization code flow, and is able to interact directly with the user. And that allows for pretty interesting features, especially for inline credential issuance. And that's one of the features we are working on, that, for example, if the user is with a verifier, starts the wallet and wants to obtain a credential or a presentation for a credential, and suddenly realizes, well, I do not have a credential that I can use with that verifier, that the user then can seamlessly continue with the process and reach out to a credential provider that allows her to obtain that credential and put it in the wallet. So because in our experience in the past, people do not really set up their identity in advance, but they are triggered by the use case they want to accomplish in a certain point in time. So inline credential issuance is a very important benefit of the approach. And that also gives the issuer a lot of flexibility regarding how it authenticates the user, and so on and so on. All the advantages that the redirect-based approach of OpenID Connect gives to issuers. And we can also utilize the metadata that OpenID Connect already has to identify issuers, to identify wallets, and so on, which is important, especially if you're going for higher assurance and trust level scenarios. Some of the key ideas that we would like to illustrate before we jump into the flow. The credential issuance itself is a OAuth protected API. It's called the Credential endpoint. That's pretty simple. And we would like to support that the wallet can request a single credential, multiple credentials, but also the same credential with different formats and keys. So for example, that a user or a wallet can obtain a credential in LD with an LD proof with BBS Plus, but also with a different signature scheme, depending, for example, on what the verifier wants to obtain in a certain transaction. But also batch issuance, that is one way, for example, to prevent collation of credentials in case the SSI application uses public DIDs, for example. So we would like to give real flexibility to SSI applications. And it's important to support different proof methods for the key material that a credential is being bound to. So not all schemes that are used today use JWS-based signatures. There are proof formats and proof mechanisms that work completely differently, such, for example, for anon-creds. And we would like to be open and flexible enough to support other mechanisms, other schemes, and other proof types. And that's why we also decoupled the basic authentication mechanisms and the mechanism for message integrity that are utilized by OAuth, such as JWS attached signatures, from the actual proof mechanisms. I'm emphasizing this because previous implementations and previous proposals somehow used OAuth mechanisms to also implement the proof strategy for the key material. We decoupled that. And what we also added is, where the long discussion around that is that in the actual request to authorize issuance of a credential, the wallet itself can already pass presentations into the process. One use case for that might be that the issuer itself, for example, wants to determine the user's identity based on a credential that it previously had issued to that wallet. So in order to optimize the user experience, the wallet could directly pick the credential, create a presentation, and send it over with the authorization process, which might result in an even smoother user experience. As an alternative, we also define a mechanism that allows the issuer to call back to the wallet, exactly the wallet that just initiated the issuance request, to fetch further credentials if they are needed in the course of the process. We also have integrated a mechanism to defer the creation of a credential. So just imagine you're authorizing the creation of a credential, for example, that requires the issuer to do some background checks about yourself. And in that case, you can complete the authorization transaction. The wallet can obtain the token and can request the issuance of the credential. But the actual credential is then issued potentially 3 days later after the background check was completed. And it can be fetched then with a special token that was handed out to the wallet. So we allow for that use case as well. And we integrate with pre-existing work from the Decentralized Identity Foundation. There is a draft called the Credential Manifest, and we use that Credential Manifest to provide the wallet with metadata about the credentials that the issuer supports. So the wallet can determine, based on the OpenID configuration and additional information that the OpenID configuration refers to, what credential types, what formats, and so on the issuer provides. Kristina, do we have any questions so far that we should answer before going into the sequence diagram?
No questions, and yeah, no questions in the chat either. So we're good.
Okay, thank you. All right. So this is the basic sequence diagram for the flow. Not all the requests and responses are mandatory, but I will guide you through the sequence, and we can then also take a look into the details of the different endpoints. So starting point is that the wallet reaches out to the issuer and wants to obtain one or more credentials. If the issuer requires the wallet to present credential presentations already in the authorization request, we need to make sure that those presentations cannot be replayed. And in order to prevent replay, the wallet first of all obtains a server-generated nonce. And for those of you that attended the Depop session, you will hear things that sound very familiar, because basically the P nonce that is generated by the issuer serves a very similar purpose than the nonce that was this is generated for protecting the Depop proof. So once the wallet has obtained that nonce, it picks the credential and produces the verifier presentation. And then it initiates the authorization request. And in case it wants to present verifier presentations, it uses the VP token parameter that is defined in the OpenID Connect for verifier presentation specification, because in this case, it acts as the wallet towards a verifier. So we use that existing rails for that. And the rest is a standard OpenID Connect authentication request, where we use the claims parameter to designate which credential types the wallet would like to be created. And well, the rest or the core of the authorization process is at the discretion of the OpenID Connect OP. It might authenticate the user using a local login, using a federated login, or just using some credentials that were already presented, or it might call back to the wallet to obtain further credentials. And then the authorization solver, the OP, issues a code. That's standard authorization code flow, and the code is exchanged for an access token. And you might have noticed that the token response already contains an additional nonce. It's called the C_nonce. And the C_nonce is used to, guess what? Protect the proof of possession for the key material for the credential to be issued against replay. So the wallet, once it gets the access token, prepares the request to the credential endpoint. And that's where the rubber hits the road. The credential endpoint is the endpoint where the actual credential is being created. The wallet sends the credential type it wants to be created. It sends information about the DIT or the key material identifier. It wants this credential to be bound, the key material along with the proof of possession. And then the issuer takes that data, evaluates whether the access token is good for that credential, whether it supports the format and all the other things the wallet specified in the request, and issue the credential. Except if the credential cannot be issued immediately, then instead a so-called acceptance token is returned. And if that acceptance token is returned, that means the issuer takes more time to create the credential. So the wallet later on can request the creation of that credential at the deferred credential endpoint. And Vittorio, we've got a really extensive use case section in the draft. And just for the purpose of conciseness, we did not put a use case in a sequence diagram, but we can guide you to the use case section. And I fully agree with you. We spent a lot of time, really a lot of time, to come up with use cases and document those.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was stupid and I typed in the wrong place. But the thing is, like, it's great that you have a use case, but you didn't start from it. So now, like, all the people that didn't have any previous exposure to these needed to, like, every time you say wallet, I'm sure that all the decentralized people already know what that is, but a lot of the traditional people, the wallet is like, what kind of animal is it? How many legs does it have? So sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. It was an accident.
Oh, that's a good point. Thanks, Vittorio. So thanks for your advice. Okay, so, and if there are questions around the use cases, I think we can use the question and answer section to talk about that. So we defined some new endpoints. You might have already determined from the sequence diagram that I have shown you. We introduced a nonce endpoint that is used to create fresh nonces for replay protecting the presentations. And we defined the credential and the deferred credential endpoint where the actual business happens to issue credentials. Beyond that, we also extended existing endpoints or capabilities or mechanisms, such as server metadata. So the wallet can obtain information about the credentials. The authorization endpoint was extended not only to specify where credentials shall be issued, but the wallet, for example, can also pass information about its callback URL and user hint and so on. And please note that in the spec, we recommend the use of pushed authorization requests for that request, especially if you're passing verified presentations, because those requests will become really large and also gives the extra protection for integrity and confidentiality. And at the token endpoint, as already described, we've got that extra optional parameter that provides the wallet with a nonce that is used to replay protect the proof of possession for the key material. What's really interesting to note and amazing is that even though we do not have a fully specified protocol, at least to our standards, we've got tremendous feedback from the community, from the market. So a lot of people are really waiting to build an interface for credential issuance based on OpenID Connect. That's really amazing. So we get really confirmation that a lot of projects that I have listed here on that page are implementing the specification that we're working right now. So we already get real feedback from real implementers that we are incorporating and will be incorporating into the spec. So our next step is we plan to propose this draft to the Connect working group at the OpenID Foundation for adoption, and then hopefully can evolve the spec there along with the other specs that I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation. That's it to the slides we have prepared. Yeah, time to take questions. So I see Petri, you're commented on the use case. Yes, definitely. So Petri wrote EU EID wallet and qualified electronic attestation of attributes. Vittorio might argue this is not a real use case, but it is something where we do could be utilized. So the European Union has a couple of months ago initiated an update of the eIDAS regulation, and this regulation is the cornerstone for digital identity and qualified trust service providers in the European Union, and they clearly will be developing and evolving eIDAS into the direction of wallets. And there is a work group at ETSI working on technical standards with us. We hope we can establish a liaison with that group, and that the stuff that we are working on can be used. It's designed for exactly those use cases. Yin asked, what's the MVP use case? Well, please define your MVP. So I can tell you what we do. We at yes.com use the protocol for the following scenario. In the SF project that I mentioned on the previous slide, we would like to implement a use case where a student or an alumni of a university can obtain a diploma. And in order to get the diploma as a credential, as a verifiable credential, and in order to get that credential, she or he also needs a credential for identification purposes. So if the student goes to the university website, the university or the alumni, I think that's a better use case. So I myself, I graduated from a university a couple of years ago, and I would like to get a verifiable credential into my wallet, and I do not have a login with my university any longer because it has gone a long time ago. So I go onto the university page and I click on the button to get the diploma, and the university page tells me, please identify yourself. Then I go into my wallet and I realize, well, I don't have a credential that I can use for that purpose. So I will be offered, for example, to use my bank to create such a credential. So I select my local savings banks, for example, and that bank acting as a credential provider is generating a credential via that protocol, put that in my wallet, and then I go back to the university, and the university in turn will do the same. So the diploma, first of all, the identity credential is sent as a presentation to the university, and the university in turn creates an additional credential, the diploma, which is then put in my wallet using the protocol we just described. So Jin asks, could I use it to present government-issued COVID vaccination proof at the door without displaying user's birth date?
It's more of a presentation issue.
Yes. And the presentation is covered by the OpenID Connect for Verifiable presentation part of the OpenID Connect for SSI stack. So there is a protocol for that. Whether you can prove that you are vaccinated without displaying your personal data also depends on the credential format that you use. The OpenID Connect protocol that we are developing work with different credential formats, and some of them, for example, support selective disclosure. So you can only display, okay, you were vaccinated at what point of time without revealing your personal data. If you use this kind of credential format, what you're asking for is possible. Damien commented BBS Plus can be used for this. Yes. So BBS Plus and Matter that I mentioned before is a strong support of OpenID Connect use cases for credential issuance, and they are, I think, a key contributor to BBS Plus. So they use both in conjunction already as we are speaking. OpenID Connect for credential provisioning and BBS Plus. Damien, do you want to speak up and share your opinion with us? Your thoughts? Okay. So Brian asked, what is BBS Plus? BBS Plus is a signature scheme that is being used with verifiable credentials. And it's got the nice property that you can have a credential, which is basically a signed assertion that contains a couple of claims about you. But if you present that credential from your wallet to a recipient, a verifier, the wallet can produce a presentation that contains only a subset of the data that the verifier needs for the use case. Does it answer your question, Brian?
Yeah, well enough for.
Okay, thank you.
My dog.
Yes, and Kristina, you want to speak about your comment?
Sure, yeah. So BBS Plus currently works only with JSON-LD format of verifiable credentials. And there is a work ongoing to try to enable linkability and selective disclosure with JOTs, which is called JSON Web Proofs. And there is a session on that tomorrow, an hour after that. So yeah, I think to Torsten's point, there are different options, MDL style selective disclosure might be another option. And our goal is really to, have a protocol that it allows that flexibility of you can choose your mechanism of option to the selective disclosure, given that the relying party is willing to accept selective disclosure, right? That's like another big element there. So Torsten, just very quickly, there's a question on the wallet concept. I tend to think of a wallet in this context of, software that stores claims about the user that are called credentials in, Verifiable Credentials ecosystem. It can be locally on your phone, it can be in the browser wallet, it can be in the cloud. So there are multiple formats, definitely. And I think just that functionality of storing is generally called as a wallet. Some people may disagree, but I think that's kind of an overall umbrella. So yeah. Yeah, atomic credentials, yeah, definitely for sector disclosure.
Okay, I would like to go through the comments one by one. So Stina
Yeah,
just
sure, yeah.
commented, I guess issuing credentials for licensed health personnel is a use case. I definitely agree with that. And the advantage would be that instead of reaching out to IDP, for example, to confirm that someone is licensed health personnel, you can take that with you as a digital credential and use it in digital transactions without that dependency. And you can also combine that with other credentials. All right, so then Uday asked where the credential endpoint resides. So the credential endpoint is the endpoint where the issuer or where the wallet obtains the credential from the issuer. From a technical perspective, in the end, the credential endpoint and what's being issued is very similar to a user info endpoint if you want. The OpenID Connect user info endpoint provides you with assertion, potentially signed assertion, that you can directly consume. Whereas the credential endpoint provides you assertion that is also bind to a key. And this key is maintained in the wallet. So you just store the credential in the wallet and the assertion. And if you want to use that, then you prove the possession of that key, which is referred to in the credential to present something or to produce another assertion that can be used toward the verifier. So I would say in this protocol, there are two types of relying parties. The wallet plays the role of a relying party towards the issuer from an OpenID Connect perspective. And once the wallet is called by a verifier to present a credential, the verifier, the application that wants to consume the identity data, is a relying party in the OpenID Connect sense as well. I hope that answers the question. Otherwise, I would ask you to raise your hand and speak to us. All right. Yeah, Oliver also commented that atomic credentials are an option as well. So I think there are a lot of ideas right now floating around what the right credential format could be and how credentials could be packaged in a way that selective disclosure is being suggested. From my perspective, this is really a difficult topic where we see a lot of parallel and development is really emerging. And we would like to have a specification that can support a wide variety of different options. I mean, if we learn over time that a certain way to manage and issue credentials is a preferred way, we can optimize the specification for that. Right now, it can be used for all this different kind of formats and credentials. Vittorio, it can be generic, but it would be super useful to have a list of requirements, moving parts it requires. Does it refer to the wallet or does it refer to the protocol?
The context is basically the wallet. Like someone said, can you say more about the wallet? And Tim said, well, it can be anything. And Kristina doubled down, it can be anything. Fine. But right now, what's happening is that it feels like I am a parser for a dynamic type in which you see a variable being used and you reverse engineer the type from the properties that you use and the action that this thing is doing. So it can be anything, I agree. It can be any incarnation implementation, but what are the requirements that something needs to have in order to perform as a wallet? You said you are storing credentials, fine. So there will be a place where you're storing credentials. Is just one? Is it more than one? Like, it's a useful thing to know. You mentioned that it is using keys. Okay, which keys are where are they stored? Like, what do they look like? Do you have more than one? Do they have a life cycle? So, in other words, what are the things, the moving parts that something needs to have in order to be called a wallet. And then I agree that you don't need to say whether it's operating system or whether it's Google Pay, whether it's something in the cloud. I know that people have fantasies of PWAs and similar. I'm just saying, like, why do we need to reverse engineer it when you guys clearly have it in your head? And when I say you guys, I don't mean Torsten and Kristina. I mean the entire decentralized universe, which is using the wallet every day. Okay, I said my piece.
You sound exhausted. Thank you. So, Petri, do you want to share some opinions, some insights with us about what's going on with the work at the European Union?
Hi guys, unfortunately I can't. It's right now it's a work between member states and named representatives, and Commission is about to launch a portal for the private sector collaboration. But the wallet is something that we are trying to define, and this presentation goes quite nicely into that work that we do. So I sent you an email, so hopefully you can reply to me tomorrow latest.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it was just a request that you can could you send this presentation to me so that I can share it within the working group.
Yeah, definitely. I think we would tweak this presentation to include also information about the presentation interface, not only the issuance. Okay, thanks a lot. All right. So I think we have covered all comments and questions so far. Is there anything else? Damien just comments, interop between wallets, agents is a real problem. Some support SIOP, some DITCOM v2. Well, yes, some support DITCOM v1. Others have proprietary protocols. It's a real mess. I fully agree with you.
Well, we're in the implementation feedback gathering stage, right? It's definitely not perfect right now. And that's why, exactly, Oliver, that's why this work is happening. And we're seeing some good feedback and some conversions starting.
And we also do prototyping for the verification, for the VP, for OpenID Connect, for verifiable presentation side. We do, for example, really have a prototype. I mean, we did some demos at IW about that, and we got tremendous feedback because it's really simple. And that's something that is really a differentiator towards other proposals. So, I mean, the SSI space is a really emerging space right now. And we see a lot of competing approaches. And in the end, my personal opinion is the market will decide what in the end will be the best approach.
So Victoria was asking relationship between the wallets here and the cryptocurrency wallets.
I was about to ask Oliver to answer. Do you want to turn on your mic, Oliver?
Yeah, I can turn on my mic. I mean, I'm Oliver from Consensus Mesh, and Consensus is actually hosting the MetaMask project, so it's related to what I do. So MetaMask is a Web3 wallet, and Web3 wallet means Ethereum wallet in that regards, and Ethereum implements JSON RPC APIs that are defined through so-called Ethereum improvement proposals. So they have their own standards. So technically, we could suggest that those wallets we could propose an EIP for SIOP. So wallets implemented, but currently, I think the problem with MetaMask and with other crypto wallets is they're just busy with integrating other stuff. I mean, the Web3 market is exploding right now. So there's things like, swapping, decentralized exchanges, and so on. So I think they all see the value in DITs and VCs, but they are just too busy to integrate those things. So I proposed an EIP which defines how to store, request, and present verifiable credentials in MetaMask, for example, or in other Web3 wallets. But I got positive feedback from them, but they're just too busy to integrate those things at the moment. That's the problem, the real problem, actually.
So the relationship between the wallets discussed here and MetaMask and all the other crypto fantasies is there's none. We use wallet, but it's a jingo jango fallacy. Same word, but completely different animals. Is that the conclusion I need to draw?
Yeah. I think that's a good conclusion. It's not. I mean, it's not entirely a good conclusion because I think ideally it will converge. But so MetaMask and other crypto wallets, especially in the Web3 space and the Ethereum space, they do like the concept of SSI and credentials and DID. So they would technically implement it, but they're just too busy with other things, and they cannot put it on their roadmap. So ideally, so when we speak about wallets, it's not crypto wallets. I think that's an important thing to note here. It's about dedicated identity wallets. That's correct.
Yeah. In terms of PR, I think this is going to be an interesting point to clarify, because now you see Twitter blossoming with all the values, sign in with Ethereum and similar. So I think that the confusion between MetaMask, Wallet Connect, and the things that are happening here it's inevitable. So I'm wondering whether in your communications, yours as in you guys working on those initiatives, you should preempt some of those questions so that I don't have to answer my own customers when they ask me. Thank you very much.
Tim has a hands up. Did you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of disagree a little bit with that response, right? I mean, there's a wallet is a holder of credentials and claims, right? So there's no reason why my Coinbase wallet or MetaMask wallet cannot hold passkeys and VCs, and like we're on that track, right? Like some people are going to prefer that their OS wallet holds cryptocurrency and VCs and their MDL and passkey, right? That's the goal, is to allow the user to choose and hopefully put some security requirements around what that means, right? Like that's the whole point of the certification around FIDO and WebAuthn, right? There are certain requirements for authenticators. And if these are all low risk situations where the credential is low risk, then the user is likely going to be able to use whatever they want, assuming we can get to a point where something can broker invoking the correct wallet. And I think that's what we're kind of on a path now in a good way that the user should be able to choose. And why would we push the user to install a separate wallet if they can use their crypto wallet? So I guess I disagree.
And can I just quickly respond to this?
Go ahead, Oliver. Yeah,
because I didn't say that it should not converge, and I think it will converge at some point. I'm just saying that the crypto wallet providers, they're just busy with other work today. So they see the value in SSI, they see the value in VCs and DIDs. They just don't have the time to integrate those things because they're busy with other problems. But I do agree with you, Tim, that there is no reason why both things could not converge. I think that's totally a valid point.
Yep. I raised the hand, but I wanted to make 2 points of clarification. So one, there's an interesting question I received in a private chat that I think is worth explaining. The question is, the usage of CNONs as a credential endpoint looked like one authenticated session is restricted to the issuance of just one credential. And I wanted to clarify that's not the case. So one request to the credential issuance endpoint would give you back one credential, but you would receive a second CNONs that you can use to request issuance of the next credential right away. So it's one, if the user gave consent and authorized issuance of multiple credentials as authorization request endpoint, you can get all those credentials within one authorized session. I just think that was like, like the clarification there. And there is a question in the chat about authentication and claims presentation. And it's not the issuance spec scope, it's more in presentation side, but I just wanted to quickly address by saying, Yes, it is a conversation we're having a lot in the SIOP OIDC for BP context. In SIOP itself, the main use case is authentication. It's just that authentication done by the identifier brought by the user, not assigned by the third-party OP. And if you want to transport verifiable presentations, you have to use OIDC for VP on top of it. Using SIOP, cross-device SIOP for authentication is a bit, trickier from a security perspective, but don't think of SIOP as, it covers authentication too. So yeah.
So I think if there are no further questions, we can also close the session. Give everyone. Oh, there's a question turning up.
Okay, how should I trust on my OP? They should verify a credential from an external OP.
Well, this is a question of the trust relationship. So if you trust the issuer of the other company, and you determine that the credential was issued by that issuer that you trust for that purpose, you can rely on that verifiable credential. I mean, basically, from a trust perspective, there is no difference between whether you do that via a federation or by using verifiable credentials. The issuer of a credential is still the issuer, and you need to trust this issuer either directly or indirectly.
Yeah, two layers, right? With federation, you're trusting that the IDP with whom you have a relationship is giving you that credential, so you can trust it. With verifiable credentials, that trust becomes the signature plus the cryptographically resolvable identifier. But yeah, so there's this trust issue.
I mean, but it's a difference. I mean, whether you trust the credential, basically,
yes, exactly.
Issued by the issuer is the same as an OpenID Connect. What the indirection comes into play because you do not get the credential directly from this issuer, but you have the indirection via the wallet. That's why you need the cryptographic binding. So Nathan, does it answer your question, or is?
Hi. Yes, it answers. However, I don't understand if you have to exchange keys with your partners before or not. Is there any way to trust another private issuer via the protocol, or should I exchange something before doing this kind of trust with the wallet? Thanks.
Yeah, you need to establish a trust relationship, and you typically we do this beforehand. So I mean, in OpenID Connect, for example, you trust those issuers that you know the OpenID Connect issuer URL for. In SSI space, you typically have a list of DIDs of issuers that you trust in, or you exchange keys. But I mean, to establish on-demand trust requires you typically another trust anchor that in the end vets for the other issue. That's why what Kristina referred to, I think what you meant when you mentioned federations as an indirection for that.
Okay, thanks.
Also, in SIOP, Nathan, we kept both options, right? You can have a conventional, well, when you talk about RPOP trust, not the issuer trust, they're both mechanism using issuer identifier to pre-retrieve the metadata. And second is, I think in GNAP, there was a point where you can pass registration in the request, registration method in the request, so you don't have to do it out of band beforehand. There is an option in SIOP too, right? Where you pass the metadata inside the request, because essentially that's, so they're both options, depending on your trust level, that you need. It's just about, okay, David is saying, this is just about how to use OIDC REST to issue the credential, how to, yes. So yeah, exactly. Based those requirements, governance frameworks is on top of protocol. Absolutely.
We have to mention, or we should mention that, for example, in the SIO v2 context, we also discuss additional support for trust frameworks. For example, that you verify may determine what wallets, for example, support a certain trust framework and so on. So there's some work ongoing to provide technical primitives that could be used to, for example, manage a trust framework as a collective of for example, wallets or credential issuers.
Sorry, I'm just having attention span similar to a goldfish. It's cool. And commenting on IDP itself, could itself possess a verifiable credential that asserts its relationship. Yeah, VCs are flexible enough that have a lot of use cases, and that's why VCs are usable not just with SIO, but also with CodeFlow too. But I think Pam, you unmuted. Did you want to comment?
Oh, sorry, I unmuted by accident, but I will add a comment just that I think there's a really interesting question of relationship that can exist. It can be a long-lived introduction to something where you have to log in, or it can be a short-lived ephemeral blink. So maybe that's obvious, but since I accidentally unmuted, I thought I would say it.
Thanks, Pam.
Beautiful, thanks.